This is HOA Control Freaks. I did not raise my voice, I raised my evidence packet. My snowblower coughed and died mid-pass, and Karen screamed that I was making noise outside the allowed hours, and she was writing a violation unless I shut it off and re-cleared the sidewalk by hand. I am calling management, and you will not like what happens next. She was standing on the curb with a clipboard, her white belted wool coat spotless against the gray slush piled everywhere, breath coming out in furious clouds. I was in my driveway in Calgary, Alberta at 6:45 in the morning, holding the handle of a machine that had just quit on me, and Julie Moore, Rules Enforcement Chair for the Icicle Hollow Reserve Association, was already writing. I work nights as a nurse in a busy clinic, and I had just gotten home 20 minutes earlier. The plow had come through at 5 and dumped a ridge of frozen slush across my driveway apron that was nearly knee-high. I needed to get my car out by noon for an errand, and I was not about to shovel 2 feet of compacted ice by hand. The HOA allowed snow equipment between 7 and 9 in the morning, or between 4 and 6 in the evening. I had started at 6:30 because I thought I could finish before 7 and avoid the traffic, but the blower choked on a chunk of road salt, and now Julie was acting like I had set off fireworks at midnight. She shined her flashlight directly at the bright orange driveway snow stakes I had planted at the edge of my property line. Those stakes had been yanked out twice already this season, and I had replanted them every time. The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I. She said it with her chin up, her dark brown ponytail swinging as she turned to scribble something else on her clipboard. I could see her breath in the cold air, and I could hear the scrape of her pen even over the wind. I pulled out my phone and hit record. I angled it low, screen turned away so she could not see the display, and I kept my backpack strap with the camera case inside positioned where the lens peeked out just enough. Your camera does not matter. My minutes are the truth. She said it without looking up. That was the line I would remember later, the one that came back to bite her harder than any fine ever could. I asked her what the violation was. She said noise before 7. I pointed out that it was now 6:52 and I had stopped. She said the start time was the violation and the equipment staying in the driveway was a hazard because it blocked pedestrian sight lines. I looked at my driveway. The blower was 3 feet from the sidewalk and there was no pedestrian anywhere in sight. The whole street was empty except for 2 neighbors down the block whispering with salt buckets in hand, watching us from behind a snowbank. Julie pulled a folded paper from inside her coat. It was a tow authorization slip with no readable text, but I recognized the Icicle Hollow logo at the top. She pointed at it and said if I did not move the equipment immediately and finish clearing by hand, she would authorize a tow for obstruction. I was saving for something important, a down payment on a small rental property that would give me a safety net if the clinic ever cut hours, and the HOA was already bleeding me with bogus late fees from the previous month. They had refused to accept my payment online, claimed the portal was down, then charged me $50 when the check arrived 2 days after the grace period. I had the payment confirmation saved in a folder on my phone proving I had tried to pay on time, but the board had ignored my emails. I told her I would move the blower into the garage and finish the rest later. She said later was not acceptable because the sidewalk was a slip hazard and she was filing an emergency safety complaint. I asked who had complained. She said multiple residents. I asked for names. She said that information was confidential. I asked when the complaint was filed. She said this morning. I pointed out that the plow had only come through 2 hours ago and no one had been outside except her. She told me I was being argumentative and that would go in the report. I dragged the dead blower into the garage and grabbed a shovel. Julie stood on the sidewalk with her flashlight, shining it at every icy patch I missed, calling out corrections like a drill sergeant. The cold was cutting through my coat and my hands were already numb. I had been awake for 16 hours and my shift at the clinic had been brutal. Back-to-back traumas and a ventilator coding at 4 in the morning. And now I was shoveling slush under the scrutiny of someone who had clearly been waiting for me to slip up. One of the neighbors, a guy named Marcus who worked from home as a CPA, walked over with his own shovel. He was a friend and he had helped me spot the red flags in the HOA ledger a month earlier when I had started digging into the fees. He asked Julie if she needed help with anything. She said no and told him he was blocking the sidewalk. He stepped onto my driveway and started shoveling beside me. Julie wrote something on her clipboard and walked away, her white coat bright against the gray morning. Marcus whispered that She had been out since 6 taking photos of driveways. He had seen her from his window. She was targeting me specifically because I had questioned the late fees at the last board meeting, and now she was building a case to justify an amenities ban or even a lien. I asked how he knew. He said his wife was on the landscaping committee and had overheard Julie on a call with the management company, asking how fast they could escalate enforcement on a single owner. I finished the driveway and the sidewalk by 7:30. My back was screaming and my fingers felt like ice picks. I went inside and checked my email. There was already a violation notice from the HOA, time-stamped 6:51, citing noise before hours and failure to clear pedestrian walkways. The fine was $200, due in 5 days, with an additional $50 processing fee. The notice said a follow-up inspection would occur within 24 hours, and any remaining non-compliance would result in a $500 emergency safety fee. I called the management company. The agent who answered said she could not discuss individual violations, but confirmed that the enforcement chair had the authority to issue emergency citations if a safety hazard was documented. I asked what documentation was required. She said photographic evidence and a written report. I asked to see the photos. She said they were part of the enforcement file and only available through a formal records request, which cost $75 and took 10 business days. I asked if I could appeal. She said appeals had to be submitted in writing within 72 hours and would be reviewed at the next board meeting, which was 3 weeks away. I hung up and opened the folder on my phone where I had been saving everything. I had payment confirmations proving I was never delinquent despite their winter fee blast, screenshots of the portal error messages from December, and now a video of Julie threatening a tow over a machine that was off and out of the way. I also had something else, something I was not ready to share yet. I waited for the right audience, because the reveal needed witnesses. If you are enjoying this HOA nightmare, hit like and subscribe for more stories where the rules backfire in the most satisfying ways. 2 hours later, Marcus texted me a screenshot. It was from the neighborhood group chat, a message Julie had posted at 8:15. The message said I had refused to clear my sidewalk, created a hazard for school bus stops, and ignored multiple warnings. It included a photo of my driveway taken at an angle that made the snowbank look like it was blocking the entire sidewalk, even though the sidewalk was clear. The photo was time-stamped 6:43, which was before I had even started the blower. I looked at the photo more carefully. The angle was wrong. The snow in the picture was deeper and less disturbed than it had been after the plow came through. I opened my own photos from that morning. I had taken a quick shot of the driveway at 6:20 to document the plow damage for my records. The snowbank in my photo was different. The piles were higher and the tire tracks were visible. In Julie's photo, the tracks were gone and the snow looked untouched, like it had been taken the night before. I called Marcus and asked him to look at the timestamp metadata if he still had access to the group chat files. He was good with spreadsheets and digital forensics because of his CPA work. He said he would pull the file and check. 10 minutes later, he called back. The metadata showed the photo was taken at 11:30 the previous night, nearly 7 hours before Julie claimed I had refused to clear the walk. She had falsified the timestamp. That was my trump card. A screenshot of Karen instructing a vendor to falsify a photo timestamp. I did not have the instruction itself yet, but I had the proof that the timeline was fake, and Marcus was digging into the group chat admin logs to see if there was more. I saved the evidence and did not post anything in the group chat. I needed to deploy this carefully. I show it to the tow company owner and they cut ties immediately. That was the plan, but first I needed to make sure the tow company was even involved. That afternoon, an HOA vendor showed up unannounced with a clipboard and tried to step into my yard. He said he was doing a winter safety audit and needed to inspect my property line for ice dams and drainage blockages. I asked for his credentials. He showed me a badge with the Icicle Hollow logo but no name. I asked who had authorized the inspection. He said the enforcement chair. I told him I did not consent and he needed to leave. He said refusal to allow inspections was a violation under the CC&Rs. I told him to show me the section. He could not. I recorded the interaction on my phone. He stood on my front step for another 2 minutes, arguing that I was creating liability for the HOA by refusing access, then finally walked away. I checked the CC&Rs that night. There was no provision for unannounced inspections. Inspections required 14 days written notice unless there was an immediate threat to life or property, And even then, the board had to vote to authorize emergency access. Julie had sent this guy out on her own authority, hoping I would not know the rules. The next morning, I got another email. This one was from Julie directly, not the management company. It was an email blast to the entire neighborhood, framed as a safety advisory. The subject line said winter hazard update, and the body of the email said one resident was refusing to comply with snow removal requirements and had been cited multiple times for creating dangerous conditions. It did not name me, but it described my address as the property on the north end of Maple Crescent with the red mailbox. There were only 2 houses on that block, and mine was the only one with a red mailbox. The email went on to say that the board was considering an amenities ban for non-compliant owners, effective immediately, to protect the community from liability. It listed the amenities, the clubhouse, the gym, the pool area, and the guest parking passes. I did not use most of those, but the guest parking was critical because I had family visiting in 2 weeks and there was no street parking allowed overnight in the neighborhood. Marcus forwarded me 3 replies from other residents. 2 were supportive of Julie, saying safety came first and rules existed for a reason. 1 was from a woman who asked why the board was not addressing the plow company that kept dumping slush across driveways. Julie replied to that one within minutes, saying the plow company was under contract and any complaints had to go through the proper channels, which meant a formal written request that cost $50 to file. I was running out of time. Karen threatens to call police for alleged winter hazards, and I need my documentation ready. That was the pressure now. If she called the police and framed it as a safety issue, I would be dealing with an official report that could justify her escalation even if it was bogus. I needed to get ahead of her, but I also needed to let her hang herself a little more. That night, I set up a second camera in my garage window facing the driveway. I made sure the timestamp was synced and the video was backed up to the cloud in real time. If anyone came onto my property again, I would have proof. I also printed out the payment confirmations and the metadata report Marcus had pulled from the group chat. I put everything in a folder and labeled it Evidence File, and I made 3 copies. 1 stayed with me, 1 went to Marcus, and 1 went into a safe deposit box. The follow-up inspection happened the next afternoon. Julie showed up with the same vendor from before, plus a guy in a reflective vest who said he was from the tow company. They stood on the sidewalk and took photos of my driveway, my front step, and the orange snow stakes at the property line. The tow company guy measured the distance from the curb to the stakes with a tape measure and wrote something on a tablet. I watched from the window and recorded everything on my phone. Julie knocked on my door. I opened it but stayed in the doorway. She said the inspection had identified multiple violations, the snow stakes were placed too close to the street and constituted a visual obstruction, the driveway apron had a 1/4-inch lip of ice that was a slip hazard, and the garage door weather stripping was torn, which allowed snow to drift into the garage and created a moisture problem that could affect the building foundation. She handed me a new notice. The total fines were now $850. Due in 48 hours. If I did not pay, the HOA would place a lien on the property and suspend my access to amenities immediately. I asked to see the photos. She said they would be available through the records request process. I asked to see the vendor credentials. She said they were on file with the management company. I asked when the board had voted to authorize this inspection. She said the enforcement chair had emergency authority and did not need a vote. I told her that was not what the CC&Rs said. She said I was misinterpreting the documents, and if I continued to be argumentative, she would file a harassment complaint. The harassment complaint arrived by email 2 hours later. It said I had verbally confronted the enforcement chair on multiple occasions, refused to cooperate with inspections, and created a hostile environment for HOA staff. It recommended a formal hearing to determine whether my behavior warranted a restraining order or further escalation. The hearing was scheduled for 5 days out at the clubhouse, 6 in the evening. I called my friend who was an attorney. She did not specialize in HOA law, but she knew enough to tell me that most of what Julie was doing was procedurally questionable, and some of it might be fraud. She said the falsified photo timestamp was a smoking gun if I could prove Julie had instructed the vendor to fake it, and the refusal to provide inspection documentation was a violation of the state HOA transparency statute. She said I should file a complaint with the management company and the state HOA oversight board, and I should show up at the hearing with everything printed and organized. She also said I should be ready for Julie to escalate further, because people like her did not back down until they were forced to. I filed the complaints that night. I sent the metadata report, the payment confirmations, and a written timeline to the management company with a subject line that said urgent records violation and falsified evidence. I sent the same package to the State Oversight Board with a cover letter summarizing the selective enforcement and procedural failures. I did not mention the trump card yet. I was holding that for the hearing. 2 days before the hearing, the group chat blew up. Someone had posted a question asking why the HOA was spending so much money on enforcement when the roads were still a mess and the mailboxes were buried in plow snow. Julie replied that enforcement was a fiduciary duty and the board had no choice but to pursue violations aggressively. Someone else asked how much the HOA was paying the tow company. Julie said that was confidential. Another person said their neighbor had been fined $300 for a trash can being left out 1 hour past pickup, and they wanted to know why the rules were only being enforced on certain streets. The thread turned into a pile-on. People started listing examples of selective enforcement. One owner got fined for parking a work van overnight, but another owner had a boat in their driveway for 3 months with no penalty. Someone said the landscaping company had torn up a sprinkler line and the HOA refused to cover the repair, even though the line was on common property. Someone else said Julie had personally approved a fence variance for her friend, but denied the same variance for 2 other owners. Julie tried to shut it down by posting a message saying the group chat was not the appropriate venue for complaints, and anyone who continued to post grievances would be subject to communication violations under the conduct policy. That made it worse. 3 people replied in all caps, saying the board was silencing residents and the conduct policy was being weaponized. The thread got so chaotic that the group chat admin, who was not on the board, stepped in and said everyone needed to take a breath and bring concerns to the meeting. That night, Julie posted a final message in the group chat. She said the hearing scheduled for the following evening would address multiple code violations and conduct issues, and attendance was mandatory for affected owners. She said the board had received complaints about harassment and intimidation, and anyone who disrupted the hearing would be removed and subject to additional penalties. She ended with, "The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I." It was the same line she had used on my driveway, and seeing it in writing made my blood boil. Marcus texted me. He said his wife had just told him that Julie had tried to recruit 2 board members to support a motion to ban me from all amenities and fine me an additional $2,000 for creating a pattern of defiance. One board member had refused. The other had said he wanted to see the evidence first. Julie had responded by saying the evidence was in the file and the board had to trust her judgment as enforcement chair. The first board member had replied that trust was not the same as documentation, and he was not voting on anything without seeing the proof. I spent the next day organizing my evidence. I printed everything again, put it in a binder with tabs, and made copies for every board member. I included the metadata report showing the falsified photo timestamp, the payment confirmations proving I was never delinquent, the video of Julie threatening the tow on my driveway, the email blast framing me as a safety hazard, and the records request denial. I also printed a copy of the state HOA transparency statute with the relevant sections highlighted. The last page was a single screenshot I had been holding back, the one Marcus had finally found buried in the group chat admin logs. The screenshot showed a private message exchange between Julie and the vendor who had shown up for the unannounced inspection. In the exchange, Julie told him to take a photo of my driveway the night before I cleared it, adjust the timestamp to make it look like it was taken in the morning, and upload it to the enforcement file as proof of non-compliance. The vendor had replied asking if that was legal. Julie had replied that it was a judgment call and the board would back her up. That was the trump card. I was going to show it to the tow company owner and they would cut ties immediately, but first I needed to use it to destroy her credibility in front of the entire board. The hearing was supposed to start at 6. I got to the clubhouse exterior steps and entry sidewalk at 5:45. It was snowing lightly, and the walkway was slick. A small crowd had already gathered, maybe 15 people, standing in clusters and talking quietly. Marcus was there with his wife. 2 of the board members were there, both looking uncomfortable. Julie was not there yet. At 5:55, a truck pulled up. It was the tow company owner, a guy named Rick who ran a small operation and did most of the HOA towing in the neighborhood. He got out and walked toward the clubhouse entrance. I intercepted him on the sidewalk. I introduced myself and said I had something he needed to see. He looked annoyed, but he stopped. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshot of Julie instructing the vendor to falsify the photo timestamp. Rick read it twice. His face went red. He said if that was real, Julie had put him in a liability nightmare, because he had authorized a tow based on her documentation, and now he was looking at a fraud complaint. I told him it was real, and I had the metadata to prove it. He said he wanted copies of everything. I handed him a folder. He stood there on the sidewalk, snow falling around us, flipping through the pages, and his expression went from angry to disgusted. He said he was done with the HOA effective immediately, and he was going to send Julie a termination letter first thing in the morning. He also said he was going to refund any tow fees I had been charged, even though I had not been towed yet, because he did not want his company anywhere near this mess. Rick walked into the clubhouse and I followed. The meeting room was packed. People were standing along the walls because there were not enough chairs. The board president, a quiet guy named Tom, who mostly let Julie run things, was sitting at the front table with the other board members. Julie was sitting at the end of the table with her clipboard and her white coat draped over the back of her chair. She saw me walk in and her expression went cold. Tom called the meeting to order. He said the agenda included a discussion of code enforcement, a review of recent violations, and a hearing on conduct complaints. He started with the violations. Julie stood up and said there were currently 12 open cases, most of them related to snow removal and winter safety. She said the board needed to authorize additional fines and expedited lien filings to ensure compliance. She pulled out a stack of photos and started passing them around the table. One of the board members, a woman named Linda, picked up a photo and frowned. She said the timestamp looked wrong. Julie said the timestamp was accurate and the photo had been taken during a compliance inspection. Linda said the lighting did not match the time of day. Julie said the lighting was irrelevant and the photo showed a clear violation. Linda said she wanted to see the metadata. Julie said the metadata was part of the enforcement file and not subject to review during the meeting. Tom asked if anyone had questions. I raised my hand. He nodded at me. I walked to the front and set my binder on the table. I said I had evidence that the enforcement process was being conducted in bad faith, and I wanted the board to review it before voting on anything. Julie said I was out of order and my comments had to wait until the conduct hearing. Tom said I could speak now if it was relevant to the violations discussion. I said it was. I opened the binder and pulled out the metadata report. I passed copies to every board member. I explained that the photo Julie had been using to justify my violations was taken 7 hours before the time she claimed, and the timestamp had been falsified. I showed them the side-by-side comparison of my photo and hers, with the differences in the snowbank and tire tracks. I showed them the payment confirmations proving I had never been late despite the fee blast. I showed them the video of Julie threatening a tow over a machine that was off and out of the way. Then I pulled out the screenshot. I passed it to Tom first. He read it, looked at Julie, and read it again. He passed it to Linda. Linda read it and her face went pale. She asked Julie if this was real. Julie said it was taken out of context. Linda said there was no context that made instructing a vendor to falsify evidence acceptable. Julie said she had been trying to document a pattern of non-compliance, and the vendor had misunderstood her instructions. Linda said the message was clear, and there was no misunderstanding. Tom asked if anyone else had seen this. Rick, the tow company owner, stood up from the back of the room. He said he had just seen it 20 minutes ago, and he was terminating his contract with the HOA immediately, because he was not going to be part of a fraud scheme. He said Julie had submitted the falsified photo as part of a tow authorization request, and if he had gone through with it, he would have been liable for an illegal tow. He said he was refunding any fees related to my case, and he was reporting the incident to his insurance company. The room went silent. Julie tried to stand up, but Linda told her to sit down. Linda said the board needed to suspend all enforcement actions until an independent audit could be completed. Tom agreed. He said the enforcement file would be sealed and turned over to the management company for review, and Julie would be removed from her role as enforcement chair effective immediately. Julie said that was not legal, and the board did not have the authority to remove her without a vote. Tom said they were voting right now. He called for a motion. Linda made the motion. Another board member seconded. The vote was unanimous. Julie stood up and grabbed her clipboard. She said the board was making a mistake, and she would be filing a complaint with the management company. Linda said the management company had already received a complaint from me, and the State Oversight Board was reviewing it. Julie's face went white. She said that was a lie. Linda pulled out her phone and showed her an email from the management company confirming the investigation. Julie tried to grab the phone. Linda pulled it back. Tom told Julie to leave. She refused. Tom said if she did not leave, he would call the police. Julie said the police would not do anything because the HOA was not law enforcement. Tom said that was exactly why she needed to leave. Julie stormed out. The room erupted in noise. People were talking over each other, some angry, some relieved, some just stunned. Tom banged his hand on the table and called for order. He said the board would be scheduling an emergency meeting to discuss reforms, and anyone who wanted to submit feedback could email the management company. He said all current fines related to my case were being dismissed, and the board would be reviewing every other open enforcement case to ensure they were handled properly. He also said the board was going to require documented proof and 2 approvals before any tow could be ordered going forward. Linda stood up and said the board owed me an apology. She said selective enforcement and falsified evidence were serious violations of the CC&Rs, and the board should have caught it sooner. She said the association was going to cover the cost of my records requests and any legal fees I had incurred. Tom agreed. He asked if I had anything else to add. I said I wanted the evidence read into the minutes, so it became official. Tom said he would make sure the metadata report and the screenshot were attached to the meeting minutes and filed with the State Oversight Board. Marcus caught up with me outside after the meeting. He said that was the most satisfying thing he had ever seen. His wife hugged me and said half the neighborhood was going to thank me for finally standing up to Julie. I told him I could not have done it without Marcus pulling the metadata and his wife keeping me updated on what Julie was planning. Marcus said Julie was finished and there was no way the board would let her near enforcement again. 2 days later, I got an email from the management company. It said the audit had been completed and the board had voted emergency reforms that required documented proof and 2 approvals before any tow could be ordered. It also said Julie had been removed from the board entirely and placed on a no-contact directive by management, meaning she was not allowed to communicate with me directly or through third parties about any HOA matter. The email said the HOA was stopping selective enforcement after complaints piled up, and a new enforcement committee would be formed with oversight from an independent third party. The group chat was still going. Someone had posted a motion to challenge the board in the next election, and 20 people had already signed on. The motion called for term limits, mandatory transparency for all enforcement actions, and a rule requiring board members to recuse themselves from any case where they had a personal conflict. The post ended with a line that made me laugh, a board election challenge that flips the power dynamic. That was exactly what was happening. A week later, I was outside clearing a light dusting of snow from my front step when a car pulled up. It was Linda from the board. She got out and walked over. She said she wanted to apologize in person for how the situation had been handled. She said the board had been too trusting of Julie and had not asked enough questions, and it had taken my evidence to force them to see what was really going on. She said the reforms were already making a difference, and the new enforcement committee was reviewing every case with fresh eyes. She also said Julie had tried to file a defamation suit against me and the board, claiming I had lied about the evidence and damaged her reputation. Linda said the suit had been dismissed within 48 hours because Julie could not provide any evidence to counter the metadata report or the screenshot. She said Julie's attorney had advised her to drop it and move on, but Julie was still trying to rally support in the neighborhood by claiming the board had violated her rights. I asked how that was going. Linda laughed and said not well. Most people had seen the evidence by now, either through the group chat or through word of mouth, and the consensus was that Julie had brought it on herself. Linda said there was even talk of the HOA suing Julie for the cost of the audit and the legal fees, but the board had decided it was not worth it. They just wanted her gone and the association to move forward. The funny karma moment came 2 weeks later. There was another board meeting, this time about the budget and snow removal contracts. Julie showed up even though she was no longer on the board and tried to speak during the public comment period. Tom told her she had 3 minutes. Julie stood up and started reading from a prepared statement about how the board had overstepped its authority and the reforms were illegal. She said the enforcement chair had emergency powers under the CC&Rs, and the board could not remove her without a full membership vote. Linda interrupted her and asked if she wanted to make that a formal motion. Julie said yes. Linda said motions had to be seconded and voted on by the board, and since Julie was not a board member anymore, she could not make a motion. Julie said she was making a motion as a homeowner. Linda said homeowner motions had to be submitted in writing 10 days before the meeting. Julie said that was a technicality. Linda said the rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I. The room erupted in laughter. Julie tried to storm out, and someone asked for her motion on record. She left without answering. I did not see Julie much after that. She moved out 3 months later, selling her house to a young couple who had no idea about the drama. The new owners were quiet and kept to themselves, which was a relief. The neighborhood settled into a new normal. The enforcement committee actually started enforcing the rules evenly, going after the boat in the driveway and the torn-up sprinkler line and the plow company that kept dumping slush. People stopped complaining in the group chat and started showing up to meetings instead. Marcus and his wife hosted a small dinner at their place to celebrate the election results. The new board had 3 fresh members. All of them voted in on a platform of transparency and fairness. One of them was the woman who had asked about the plow company in the group chat. She told me she had run specifically because of what had happened with Julie, and she wanted to make sure no one else got targeted like that. She said the reforms were working, but there was still a lot of cleanup to do, especially in the budget and vendor contracts. The HOA stopped trying to bleed me dry. The late fees disappeared. The bogus violations were expunged from my record. I even got a formal letter from the board apologizing for the harassment and confirming that all fines had been dismissed. The letter was signed by Tom and Linda, and it included a sentence that said the board recognized my efforts to hold the association accountable and appreciated my patience during the process. I framed it and hung it in my garage next to the orange driveway snow stakes, which had not gone missing once since Julie left. The tow company owner, Rick, ended up becoming the HOA's new vendor for emergency removals, but only after the board rewrote the contract to include strict documentation requirements and a 2-approval rule. Rick told me he was glad to work with the HOA again now that the process was legitimate. He said Julie had been a nightmare for every vendor she worked with, and most of them had been looking for a way out but did not want to lose the business. He said my evidence had given them the cover they needed to walk away. I kept working nights at the clinic. I kept saving for the rental property. I kept an eye on the group chat, but it was quieter now. The drama had burned itself out and people were focused on other things, like the spring landscaping bids and the pool reopening date. Every once in a while, someone would post a joke about enforcement, usually something like, "Remember when we had a rules chair who thought she was a cop?" And everyone would laugh and move on. The snow melted, the orange stakes stayed up, the driveway stayed clear, the HOA stayed out of my way. I never forgot the moment Julie tried to tow my snowblower, or the moment she told me my camera did not matter because her minutes were the truth, or the moment Linda threw her own line back at her in front of the entire board. Those moments were proof that documentation wins, that patience pays off, and that people like Julie always hang themselves if you give them enough rope. Stay calm, stay documented, and I will see you next time.